Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. It is Monday, April 25th, 2022. A Memphis prosecutor has dropped all criminal charges against Pamela Moses, the Memphis woman who was sentenced to 6 years in prison for trying to register to vote. Moses was convicted last year and sentenced in January. She was granted a new trial in February after the Guardian newspaper published a document showing that had not been given to her defense ahead of trial. The document wasn't given to her defense ahead of trial, which really was tantamount to the case against her. Moses was set to appear in court this past week and to find out whether prosecutors would pursue a retrial. We discussed that this morning and so much more with James Wright of the Washington Informer and Capitol Hill reporter and Burke Fowl host Lauren Burke. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good to see you both. Listen, let's just get into this issue with Pamela Moses. The central issue in the case was whether she had known she was ineligible to vote when a probation officer filled out and signed a form that was done with probation for a 2015 felony conviction. And James, I'll start with you because we talked about this before with these anti-voting or voter suppression tactics that have been going on. We see this, but Pamela Moses' case, she was attempting to register to vote and got 6 years, a 6-year sentence.
Well, good morning, Stacey, and good morning, Lauren. This is a case of the situation where, and I'm being very careful how I say this, but people are not being advised of their rights correctly. And it seems like there was a little bit of, trickery here. And this is just the way that I see it. And please note that this is in Tennessee. Tennessee is not in the North. It seems like there is, in her case, a situation where she was not properly advised in terms of whether she had the right to vote or not. Here in the District of Columbia, our returning citizens get information and they can attend seminars in terms of their voting rights. Now, of course, the voting rights here in D.C. are quite open, but in a jurisdiction, even something like Memphis, which is predominantly Black, the returning citizens should be advised in terms of their voting rights. Now, that's not even to say that she should go to prison over something like that or even be charged over something like that.
Yeah, Lauren, again, she was sentenced to 6 years. It was attempting to register to vote, not voting, but attempting to register to vote. And the probation officer in this case admitted he had made a mistake. And Moses said that she had no idea she was ineligible to vote. Prosecutors got inside her head and apparently and discovered in their mind that she knew what she was doing. This is all about voter suppression, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's actually the same case from the Texas example, I think it's Crystal Mason. Yeah, it's
Right.
the same case. So that kind of tells you that there's some sort of conservative effort out there to prosecute people who mistakenly register in the same state. Let's see what happens with Mark Meadows in North Carolina, who apparently was registered in 2 jurisdictions. He's not the only one who's done that. Could be an honest mistake or it could be intentional. Who knows? But why would you be prosecuting somebody to the fullest extent of the law like they're doing in Tennessee unless you were trying to send some sort of message, which is exactly what they're trying to do, because voting is power, voting is control. The Republican Party is running out of they're losing elections because the demographics in this country are changing quickly. They see that, and instead of changing their ideological views on things to make the tent bigger in their party, they've decided to fool around with the election laws. And of course, that started with the damage to Shelby back in 2012, when John Roberts, effectively dismantled the Voting Rights Act, and states now can change their laws without having to go through the federal government. So that was the start of it. And this is now, we saw what happened last week with DeSantis effectively trying to destroy 2 Black seats in Congress that 2 Black members are in right now, Al Lawson and Val Demings. I mean, this voting thing is about control. It's about power. And these little examples that they send out It's the same psychology. I get that it's not the same thing, but it's the same psychology as lynching. You know, we'll lynch somebody and show all of you what the power that we have, and then we'll put that on Front Street. And let's see who else tries to do it. You know, it's that type of psychology.
Yeah, and this Pamela Moses case, it got national attention because it underscored disparities in the way Black people are punished for voting errors. Several white defenders elsewhere have been sentenced to probation for impersonating family members and voting on their behalf. And so to give her 6 years in prison for attempting to register, I think that speaks volumes on what you're saying, Lauren.
Yes, and it does. And this is an example of how Southern states tend to be harsher with Black people as opposed to white people when it comes to the law. You're talking about voting. You're talking about democracy. You're talking about participatory democracy. But instead, it seems like they don't want us to participate. Lauren just alluded to the Crystal Mason case. And this is in Fort Worth, which is interestingly enough the city in Texas with the heaviest Black percentage of its population. And Crystal has had to fight in order to be free because her case is under review because she attempted to vote, and when she had the right to do so, many of us believe. But these are the cases we hear about. What about the cases we don't hear about in these good old boys, Southern rural areas? So we have to be vigilant. The NAACP has got to step up and continue to fight these cases.
Yeah, Lauren, you mentioned Governor DeSantis down in Florida and what he's doing or attempting to do with those seats down there. But we see the new maps that keep popping up all around, right, in Texas and in Florida and in Georgia and other places, Pennsylvania. Let me ask it this way. What are Democrats doing to combat this?
Well, they're not the entity that's doing it, but the Democratic side is winning in the courts quite often on these maps, which kind of leads me to believe that their situation, the Democrats right now, obviously the parties are 50-50 in the U.S. Senate, but the Democrats have 12 seats up in the U.S. House. And I know that everybody is in this cycle of, oh, they're going to lose. But actually, if you look at the individual seats, I don't know that they're going to lose. I think it's going to be pretty close. And they have been winning to all these challenges because the challenges are so outrageous because the Republicans are so ham-handed the way that they do things that, judges can't just, let them do whatever with these. I mean, it's so obvious what they're doing and the outcome that they're trying to create through what they're doing. And DeSantis wants to get attention, and DeSantis wants to be the next Donald Trump. So he'll do any outrageous thing to get that in the media. So, now I'm taking away 2 Black seats. Let's see what they do now. Well, what they're going to do now is that's going to go to the federal courts and probably be stricken. So I'm not sure what his master plan is after that, but we'll see. Val Demings, of course, is running for the Senate, so she wouldn't have been in that seat anyway. But Al Lawson is up for election. So, I mean, the idea that this doesn't matter when you have, there's just an amazing coincidence. We have the biggest Black caucus in the history of America, and all these things are happening, is not a coincidence.
Well, isn't it also?
And, Stacey, you have a situation in Georgia. We were talking about this before we came on, where you can go to jail if you hand somebody some water while they're standing in line to vote. And that is completely outrageous. But what I think is more outrageous is that the NAACP has not challenged that in court. They should. And I'm surprised Stacey Abrams and Latasha haven't stood up, and Cliff haven't stood up and said, this is wrong and we got to put a stop to this. Maybe they have, but I have not heard about that. But this is the kind of foolishness and mess that people have to deal with in order to participate in democracy.
Well, Latasha and Cliff have been out there, but I kind of agree with Cliff when he says, the Democratic Party thinks that magical Negroes are going to show up every 4 years and save them. And unless you're going to fund that to the tune of millions and millions of dollars, which I don't see that, then it's not going to happen. They did it in Georgia, which was a major victory. That's all Latasha and Cliff in that group. And, if the Democratic Party is interested in winning elections, they will run the right people and put the right money behind people and not go silent when candidates like Abigail Spanberger up in this new district in Virginia decide she wants to talk pro-police all the time. I'm pro-police. My father was a cop, right? But that doesn't win elections in that particular district particularly well, which I thought we learned in Virginia last year. Apparently not. But the Democratic Party doesn't want to admit that they need Black people to win elections. That's what this is about. They don't want to admit that they need Black people to win in a lot of these places, particularly a 20% state such as Virginia and Florida. Of course, Florida, I think, is 18 or 17%. I mean, you need Black people to show up. You know, it's your number one voting block, Black women, but you want to pretend like none of that matters when you know what hits the fan. So that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, Lauren, let me go back to something too, because as I was thinking, and David Youngblood was also writing it, he says they've set up the court so outrage ain't what it used to be. So these appointments that we keep hearing about, these federal appointments, we remember when Trump was in office, it seems like every day there was like dozens being appointed or at least nominated. These federal appointments are very important, aren't they?
Which federal appointments?
To the bench.
Oh, absolutely. Biden has done a really good job with his judicial appointments, though. He's done a historic job. He's put more Black women. He's done great with that. That's not, he can't do everything, right? Somebody's got to run the DCCC and the DNC and get him another few votes in the U.S. Senate and win and keep the control of the House. Like Joe Biden can't do that part of it. But now that he is in there with the majority, he is doing that part of it. And a lot of his judges have moved.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the District of Columbia, Ward 5 DC Council member Kenyan McDuffie, a candidate for District Attorney General, said he will fight a ruling by the DC Board of Elections on April 18th, which concluded that he cannot continue his campaign for the June 21st Democratic Party nomination because he lacks the credentials for the position based on the law. The McDuffie campaign plans to take the matter to the DC Court of Appeals. James, I know that you're on top of this story. You've written about it. What's the latest there?
Basically, on Thursday, they filed an expedited appeal with the DC Court of Appeals, which is sort of like the Supreme Court in the district, requesting two things. Number one, they requested that the Board of Elections ruling that he cannot run for Attorney General be set aside. And the other thing is that if they can't do that by next Thursday, which is April the 28th, he has requested that the Board of Elections ruling in that be set aside and that the primary be delayed until the matter is settled judiciously in the judicial forum. This is outrage. A lot of people are talking about this, Stacey, and I'm really surprised how many people are talking about this. I've been getting phone calls about this, about Kenyan not being able to run for Attorney General. I have heard many people say the establishment does not want him in that position. And I have heard that this is just dirty trick politics. People want to be able to decide who they want in those positions, particularly that position. He does not meet exactly the statutory requirements for Attorney General, but you know how statutes can be broadly interpreted. This should be the situation in this case.
Well, Lauren, this is a situation too where he had been on the ballot. He's been running. The campaign has been strong, pretty strong and ongoing. Why now?
Yeah, you could say that again, Stacey, right? So James's overview, of course, is excellent in knowing the details on some of the legal backstory. Okay, but let's be real here and let's talk real talk. You got a guy in Kenyan McDuffie who is a more progressive, for the people candidate that's been on the City Council of Washington, D.C. since 2012, a Howard University grad, born and bred in Washington, D.C. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a month before a primary, some guy shows up from the biggest Democratic law firm, Perkins Coie, Bruce Spiva, who we don't even know who this guy is. He just shows up out of nowhere with this challenge. And then we go to look, and what do we find? That Karl Racine, the current Attorney General of DC, wants some buddy of his, some college, some law school buddy of his to be the next Attorney General of DC. That all leads me to believe that there's a lot more to the story than what would appear to be the case through some no-name board. And this is one of the reasons why I do not vote in Washington, right? So because I vote in Virginia, I used to vote in New York. I voted in Washington maybe like 4 years. And this is why, because DC has this odd habit of floating back into being some sort of, 1940s backwater, where you do these weird under the table things that have nothing to do with the voters in Washington, D.C. Deciding anything. As we already know, there is no representation for anybody, no political representation for anybody in Washington, D.C. as it is, which is a complete outrage. But on top of that, now we've got some no-name unelected board that nobody's ever heard of deciding that Kenyan McDuffie, deciding that somebody can't be on the ballot. And of course, it's all interpretive. Oh, you're not a practicing attorney. Are you kidding me? He's been on the city council. He's never used any of his legal abilities while on the city council. So, but the bigger issue is, how did this come up in the first place? And how this comes up in the first place is Bruce Spiva and Perkins Coie. I mean, and you go and read Bruce Spiva's thing on his bio. Oh, I was raised in the South, wherever that is. It's not Washington, D.C. My mother was raised in the Jim Crow South. So, who, of course, almost any African-American sitting around can say that. Kenyan McDuffie happens to have been raised in Washington, D.C. and went to Howard University. So, I mean, this is a typical example of how the Democratic Party always figures out some way to get rid of progressives who are talking the talk for the people. I'm not a big, huge Nina Turner fan, and I'm not a big, huge, Bernie Sanders fan, but I see the pattern. When you see the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party knocking these people out systematically, that's not a coincidence, because they are talking things about poverty and housing and homelessness. And that's not what the establishment wants to talk about. The establishment wants to talk about money and contracts and who we getting in here to pay, the taxes in Washington, D.C. and city center. I mean, so that's the pattern. That's the political pattern. And when I see Perkins Coie near this thing, that kind of tells me all I need to know.
Well, it's so funny because you mentioned a month before, right? A month before. Doesn't that ring a bell? And if you recall, when then Mayor Vincent Gray was running a month before the primary, the DC Attorney General announced that he was considering indicting Vincent Gray, and that election turned upside down, of course.
Exactly.
Muriel Bowser, of course, eased in after that. But so these funny things keep happening in DC.
These funny things keep happening to progressive candidates. I mean, these funny things don't happen to establishment candidates, right? They happen to progressives that want to talk about things that political parties don't want to talk about. I mean, this is amazing how that happens, right? So I do think that it'll be interesting to see what happens on appeal. The idea in anybody's head that the people, the voters of Washington, D.C., should not decide this is outrageous. I mean, like, the idea, who's arguing that? Who's arguing that the voters of D.C. shouldn't decide who should be the next AG of D.C.? So I find that to be very interesting.
Yeah, let me make 2 quick points along the lines of what Lauren said. I spoke with Chairman Phil Mendelson, the chairman of the DC Council, which serves as the legislature for the District of Columbia, when not Congress. And he told me that was not the intent of the law to keep Kenyan McDuffie off of the ballot. That was not the intent when they designed the Attorney General's position by legislation. Second of all, I like the fact that you all talked about Vincent Gray and Muriel Bowser. And you are absolutely correct, Lauren and Stacy. A month before that election, actually, Vincent Gray was winning. He was winning in the polls. But because the establishment set in and decided who they wanted to decide, and things happen the way they do, Muriel Bowser pulled it out. But that's what happens in D.C. And the establishment, they want what they want. And the people just have to stand up and try to put a stop to it.
Yeah, and the quote from the Washington Post about following the money. If we were to know, I mean, I'm not a big expert in the contracts of Washington, D.C., but, I mean, there's certain players involved that are just so thrilled to see that Kenyan is off the ballot. Yeah, why is that? Right? And then he raises close to $1 million. See, it's funny when this comes up, right? It was about 2 weeks ago, before this whole thing happened, that Kenyan McDuffie reports almost $1 million in fundraising. So now all of a sudden, oh my goodness, we got to be checking his paperwork. And has anybody heard of Bruce Spiva? I mean, if I just not been paying attention, like they act like Bruce Spiva is John F. Kennedy. I mean, like, who is this guy? Where did he come from? Who is he? So my official residence is in Suffolk, Virginia. I do spend a lot of time in DC, but this is exactly why DC is sort of a joke in terms of political representation.
Well, we'll keep. I know James will keep on this McDuffie story. That's his beat. And he does a great job with it.
It should be a national story.
Exactly. It is huge. So we'll continue to follow it. Also, this morning, we're talking about the mask mandate. Airlines say they are offering options now, including refunds in some cases for people worried about flying now that other passengers aren't required to wear face masks. However, the airlines aren't providing many details, and customers could find themselves at the mercy of workers at airline customer service centers. The bottom line here, Lauren, we'll start with you again on this. The masking. We know what the federal judge did. No mask mandate. How is this going to affect air travel?
We don't really know. I suspect that we will probably see some sort of an uptick among the staffs of all these airlines and COVID. That would be my guess, although they're probably masked. But the idea that some 33-year-old rated unqualified judge picked by Donald Trump would put this thing out would probably make everybody wear a mask even more. But, we're a dumb country. And I think, I really think we're a dumb country, right? We sit up here and watch 1 million people die in a pandemic over a 2-year period. And we want to sit in here and argue about masks in a closed, quartered space that recycles air. Right. And so the other problem is, even if you don't, have the mask on, like, why would you risk any of this? I have no idea. With 1 million people dead, it's not theory anymore. When we first started COVID, it was back in, late 2019, right? And it hit the fan in March of 2020. Oh, we didn't really know how many people was going to be, and Donald Trump could play this game of we didn't really know. Now we know. Now we know there's 1 million people dead and a bunch of people suffering from long COVID, one of which I know, named Ralph Northam, the former governor of Virginia, who still can't taste anything and I think he still can't smell anything. He definitely can't taste anything. So every time I see him, which is like every few months still, I ask him, and he still is suffering from long COVID. I mean, that is crazy. So anyway, to say nothing of the people who have passed away. So it is laughable, the conversations that we have.
But again, hasn't it turned a long time ago? It turned political, and it's politics that's driving people's desire to not wear masks more than anything else. Is this mistrust in science? Is one thing, but I think it's coming down to the party lines. It seems, James.
It is, and let me just say that. As I make my travels around the district on the DC circulator, on the Metro bus and the Metro rail, fewer people are wearing masks. And I will say that the Black people are wearing the mask, but a lot of the white people are not. So that goes along to what you're saying in terms of the political lines, but particularly the racial lines in this. People are just tired of masks. They're tired of masks. They're tired
of living.
They're tired of social distancing. They're just tired of this. They just want this to go away. And the Republican Party is just using this, saying that it's an intrusion of our individual liberties, which is a bunch of bull crap, because this is a public emergency. This is a serious disease, as Lauren made the case for. So why in the world are they doing this? But people are just tired of this, and they're just not wearing masks anymore. Well,
Lauren, I'm sorry, James. I walk into places. I wear my mask. My family wears masks all the time. But this has been going on for the better part of the pandemic. Folks will look at you, and especially now, like you have the plague if you're wearing a mask. They look at you with such contempt. And even customer service people will treat you a little different because you have on a mask. What is going on here?
I actually don't wear it. I will take that mask off quicker than anybody. But we're talking about on an airplane. We're not just talking about in a store someplace or outside walking down the street. We're talking about in an enclosed space with a bunch of strangers for at least an hour or two with recycled air. So this is a very specialized space, an airplane. And of course, what it is, it's deliberate misinformation, disinformation put out by people who want to play politics with healthcare. I mean, that's just what this is. The minute that it came out of Joe Biden's mouth that there was going to be any sort of mask mandate or we should wear masks or anything, the Republicans decided they were going to be against it. If Joe Biden had said the opposite, they would have said the opposite. Like, that's the game that everybody wants to play. And of course, we have a social media going on right now that's putting out constant misinformation and constant disinformation that cost people their lives. Barack Obama was right last week when he made that speech about the impact of social media on our democracy, because it's just people are just off to the races with nonsense and false information.
Yeah. So United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby said his airlines will be flexible with people who have a weak immune system or are concerned about mask optional flying for any other reason. The spokesman said customers except those on the lowest price basic economy fares can delay their travel plans for any reason with no extra fee. He said passengers with special circumstances should call the airline's customer service number. American Airlines CEO Robert Isom said that the airline hasn't fielded many refund requests yet. And an American spokesperson said that look at the airline's policy, which allows refunds for refundable tickets. Those usually cost more and credit for the value of unused non-refundable tickets. However, people who bought basic economy tickets since April 1st are not entitled to a refund or to change their ticket. A Delta Airlines spokesperson said customers who wish to cancel a trip should contact the airline's. Decisions about how to handle those requests are made on a case-by-case basis. So we see the airlines coming out with their different policies, but there's something in there, and I don't know if you detected it as I was reading it, but those who have cheap tickets, you just stuck with those cheap tickets, right?
Yes, you're stuck with those cheap tickets. You're stuck with cheap food. You're stuck with Coca-Cola instead of a wine or a glass of champagne. And so this is just another example of how these airlines discriminate economically against their passengers. Look, my thinking is that you just wear a mask when you get on an airplane, just like Lauren kind of alluded to. Just because of the recycled air, just wear a mask for that, and then you can take it off when you get off. But I'm very ambivalent about the fact that there's no widespread regulation by the FAA in terms of what airplanes should do. Trains and buses are kind of different on this. But in terms of planes, there should be some sort of regulation, particularly from the FAA on this.
Well, Uber has also lifted its mask mandate as well. So we're seeing, and even, so that's a shorter ride, right, Lauren, for the most part. If you're in Uber, you're probably in Uber for 15 minutes or so. But you're still breathing that same air as that driver, right?
I'm in Uber a lot, and I find the mask mandate in Uber to be annoying because you can always just roll windows down. You can do a bunch of stuff. This is all legal liability, by the way. What this is the companies don't want to be liable if you say you got COVID in an Uber and sue Uber. So now we're just going to mandate every time you go into. It's funny you said that that's lifted because on the app it makes you check a box, which is effectively a form of a contract because you're saying that I'm pledging that I'll have a mask on when I get in the car. So they changed the app. They updated the app so you could check that box. And that's all about liability. That's all about Uber's general counsel telling the CEO, well, if somebody if somebody gets COVID in the car, they can sue us. And I'm sure people have sued them for that. And so that's what we're dealing with right now.
Well, one day we got to get Lauren to come on and play the guitar for us.
Yeah,
That's she's
that,
more than
that,
just a political person who
yeah.
reports on politics. She can play. I've seen some clips, Lauren.
Thanks. I'll do that one morning. Hopefully, it'll bring some audience. Who knows? Who knows?
Well, we certainly appreciate you, James, and we appreciate you all for watching. Let it be known. Check us out tomorrow. Hey, by the way, June 3rd, we're headed toward our 350th episode, so we're going to have some special things going on. Stay tuned. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks.